the line in the dirt. The morning broke over the Tennessee hills with a quiet that felt sacred, the kind of stillness that made you want to sit on the porch with a mug of black coffee and just breathe. I was doing exactly that, barefoot in my old flannel shirt, when the first shot cracked through the dawn like a sledgehammer on glass. My coffee mug slipped, shattering against the porch rail, and my hound, Rusty, snapped his head up with a low growl, ears pinned toward the treeline. The echo rolled back from the ridge, too close to be legal, too sharp for squirrel season. Another shot, then two more, this time near the cattle pens where my herd was still waking up. My heart didn't race, it hardened, shifting from rancher to something colder, something I hadn't felt since I pinned on the county sheriff's badge 20 years ago. I didn't say a word. I turned, walked through the creaking screen door, and pulled the Winchester 1873 from its rack above the fireplace. Not to shoot anyone, I am a sheriff. Not a vigilante, but to make damn sure whoever was playing cowboy on my land knew they'd picked the wrong fight. Rusty was already pacing by the truck, tail stiff, eyes locked on the horizon. We loaded up, and I pointed the F-150 toward the lower pasture, where the ravine dipped into a tangle of wild brush thick enough to hide trouble. I knew that spot. Every poacher in Benton County did. I saw them before they saw me. Two men in blaze orange vests, crouched over a downed buck, its antlers gleaming in the morning light. One was grinning, posing for a photo, while the other pulled a bone saw from his pack. The deer was a beauty, a 10-pointer, probably lured by the alfalfa I'd planted for my herd. Too bad it hadn't sniffed out the property line. I parked behind a row of cedars and stepped out, Winchester slung over my shoulder. They didn't even flinch, too busy laughing, too cocky to notice the world had just tilted against them. "Nice buck," I said, loud enough to carry across the clearing. The younger one, maybe 35, with a beard and brand-new camo pants, spun around. The older one, heavy-set with a face like a tax auditor, squinted at me like I was a minor inconvenience. "You with the HOA?" the older man asked, his tone dripping with the kind of dismissal reserved for bureaucrats with clipboards. "Nope," I said, stepping closer. "I'm the guy who owns this land." That shut them up. Not for long, but long enough to know I'd hit a nerve. The younger one fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, waving it like a get-out-of-jail-free card. "We got permission. HOA says this is part of the community greenbelt now. We're legal." I took the paper, unfolded it, and scanned the text. It was a hunting permit, signed by one Harold Vance, the same name that had been burning holes in my patience at every county meeting for the past year. I glanced at the buck, at the boot prints smeared with blood in my grass, then back at the idiot grinning like he'd just won a Powerball ticket. "Let me make this crystal," I said, handing back the permit. "You're on land that's never been part of your HOA. It's been in my family since my granddaddy bought it in '59. That deer's mine. That fence over there? Mine too. And unless Harold Vance bought himself a county assessor's badge, I don't give a damn what he told you. You're trespassing with firearms." The younger man's eyes darted to the treeline, probably calculating how fast he could sprint to his truck. The older one's face turned the color of raw steak, and he took a step forward like he wanted to argue, but he froze when Rusty circled behind them, tail low, eyes sharp. Rusty's a herding dog, not a brawler, but he knows how to read a room. So do I. "We didn't know," the older man muttered, his voice shrinking. "Vance said." I know what Vance said, I cut in. "And I don't care. You've got one chance to walk off my land and forget you ever saw that deer. Otherwise, I start writing reports, and you don't want that." They moved fast, loading the buck into their truck like it might vanish if they blinked. I let them gon it because I was feeling generous, but because I needed the bigger picture. This wasn't just two idiots with rifles. This was a system, a scheme, and I needed to know how deep it ran. By noon, I was back home, spreading my grandfather's survey maps across the kitchen table. Every inch of this land, 300 acres from the ridge to the creek, was bought and paid for in 1959. No easements, no public access, no greenbelt. Just private property, plain and simple. Being sheriff doesn't give me superpowers, but it does come with perks. Access to county records, a direct line to every game warden in the state, and a reputation that makes people think twice. I called Pete, a warden I'd known since high school, and laid out the situation. He groaned before I finished. "HOA zoning games again," he said. "Third time this month." They keep redrawing maps and filing them like they own the dirt. What happens if someone gets shot? I asked. Legal nightmare, Pete said. If it's on contested land, it's a mess nobody wants to touch. That was enough for me. This wasn't just personal animaria, it was a pattern. The HOA wasn't making mistakes. They were pushing boundaries, reclassifying private land as community property, and slipping it past the county with forged permits. I wasn't just protecting my cattle now. I was drawing a line in the dirt, and I'd be damned if anyone crossed it again. By dusk, I'd set up game cameras along the trails and nailed new signs to every fence post. Private property. No trespassing. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was the sheriff, and I was ready for war. The next morning, I pulled my unmarked county truck into the HOA clubhouse lot, the sun barely cresting the ridge. I left my badge at home and wore my old Carhartt jacket and scuffed boots. Today, I wasn't Sheriff Tom Harlan. I was just a landowner looking for answers. The clubhouse looked more like a country club than a place for neighborhood squabbles. Fresh mulch in the flower beds, a shiny sign proclaiming, preserving our community. I wondered if they even knew what they were preserving. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and self-importance. The receptionist barely glanced up from her phone as I nodded and headed down the hall to the meeting room. Voices spilled out, loud and confident, until I stepped through the door. A long table stretched across the room, filled with folks who thought polo shirts and agendas gave them authority. Harold Vance sat at the head, silver-haired and tanned, laughing with a woman next to him, probably another board member. His smile vanished when he saw me pull out a folding chair in the back. I crossed my arms and kept quiet, letting them stew. They were discussing green space enhancements, tossing around terms like trail expansions and wildlife zones. The phrase community recreational overlay came up 3 times before anyone acknowledged me. Vance cleared his throat and leaned forward. You're not on the speaker list, sir. Not here to speak, I said. Just listening. He didn't like that. His jaw tightened, and his hand twitched near his stack of papers, but he didn't push. Not yet. A board member stood and clicked through a slideshow about expanding hunting access in a shared wilderness zone, a chunk of land that just happened to include the entire western edge of my property. They used vague phrases like mutual enjoyment and undeveloped acreage, never once mentioning private ownership. The room nodded along like it was a done deal. I leaned forward and raised a hand. Where exactly is this shared wilderness zone? Vance exhaled sharply, annoyed. It's west of the Cedar Ridge, unimproved land under the new overlay from last year's land use proposal. Funny, I said, because that land's been improved, plenty fenced, patrolled, surveyed, and deeded to the Harlan family since '59. Ring any bells? Murmurs rippled across the table. A few eyes flicked to Vance, whose smile was now as thin as a razor. If there's a boundary dispute, sir, you can file a concern through the proper channels. The board approved the overlay per the master plan. What maps did you use for that? I asked. The real ones, or the ones you doctored in your office? The room went still. Vance's face froze, and a woman at the end of the table coughed awkwardly, trying to move to the next topic. They wanted to ignore me, but the tension was palpable now. They knew they'd been caught pushing something dirty. I stood, tipped my hat, and walked out without another word. Outside, I climbed into my truck and called Ellen, the county assessor's assistant. She owed me one after I caught a thief rummaging through her cabin last winter. Ellen, I need every plan submitted for Cedar Ridge in the last 18 months. Digital files. You think someone's messing with the boundaries? She asked. I think someone drew my land in crayon and called it a park. She promised to dig in and meet me at the county clerk's office. An hour later, we were in the records room, scrolling through files. Sure enough, there was a plat from the HOA showing my ridge wrapped in a recreational buffer. It looked legit, stamped, watermarked, even tied to an environmental grant application. But the base layer's metadata didn't match the original. The overlay had been slapped onto an outdated satellite image and filed during a system update when the old clerk retired. No formal review, just a rubber stamp. Ellen shook her head. This got snuck in during the transition. It passed validation because the software didn't flag the mismatch. It's a gray area listed as pending community access until someone challenges it. A gray area. That's what let the HOA act like my land was theirs. I thanked Ellen, grabbed a printed copy, and headed to the game warden's office. Pete met me behind the ranger station, already chewing on the news. Heard about your hunters, he said. Got 3 complaints yesterday about shots near houses. They're issuing permits, claiming it's HOA land. That's insane, I said, showing him the metadata. They're forging maps. Pete frowned, rubbing his chin. This helps, but I can't shut them down without a court ruling. If I move too fast, I'm open to lawsuits. I nodded. It was enough for now. Pete would flag the permits, making the hunters nervous. But I wasn't done. Back home, I printed new signs bold, impossible to miss, private land. No trespassing under sheriff's authority. I mounted a license plate reader on the trailhead by the old quarry and hid a trail cam in a hollow fence post. If anyone crossed again, I'd know who, what, and where. By sundown, Rusty and I sat on the porch, watching the ridge glow orange. I didn't want to fight, but it was coming. The HOA wasn't backing down. They'd already sold hunting rights to their buddies, probably for favors or cash. That buck was just the first shot. Now I had cameras, proof, and patience. Let them send more fools. When they did, they'd meet the sheriff, not the rancher. The next 2 days were too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a snake coiled in the grass. Rusty sensed it, sticking close to the porch instead of running the fence line. I checked my cameras twice daily, logging every vehicle that passed my signs. Most turned back when they saw the warnings. But on the 3rd morning, at 5:17 a.m., a camera pinged. A red Chevy pickup rolled through the south gate and didn't come out. I didn't rush. I watched, letting them dig their own grave. That's the difference between a rancher getting robbed and a sheriff building a case. I waited until they were deep in the ridge trail, then slipped on my uniform, clipped on my body cam, and loaded my sidearm not for a fight, but for the record. Rusty stayed behind as I hiked in, using the tree for cover. They weren't subtle. I found beer cans by the fence, cigarette butts under an old hunting blind, and fresh boot prints in the mud. 30 yards in, I spotted them. One guy crouched with a scoped rifle, the other setting out bait illegal for deer, doubly illegal on my land. I clicked on my body cam and stepped into the open. Morning, I said. They turned slowly, like they couldn't believe someone was there. The guy with the rifle raised it slightly, then froze when he saw my badge. You're trespassing, I said. Drop the rifle, step back, show me your permits. The bait guy stammered. We got permission, HOA said. I've heard that before. I cut in. Unless the HOA deeded you this land, you've got 3 seconds to explain why you're on private property marked by the county and the sheriff. The rifle hit the ground. The other guy looked like he wanted to vanish. I took their names, snapped photos, and called Deputy Clark to meet me at the gate. They weren't locals, part of a hunting club run by a guy named Victor Wade, who'd sold them access passes to a community wildlife reserve. Wade had given them maps, permits, even an HOA logo to make it look legit. By the time Clark arrived, I'd written citations for trespassing and illegal baiting. I let them go with a warning, but kept their permits as evidence. They weren't the prize. Victor Wade was. Back at the station, I ran his name. He was an HOA, but he owned an LLC called Cedar Outdoor Adventures. His website advertised exclusive hunts on the Cedar Ridge Conservation Area, with photos of trophy bucks and my barn in the background. That was it. I called Wade, posing as a hunter who'd heard about his club. He bragged about his HOA deal, said the land had no ranger presence, and quiet blessings from the board. I recorded every word. That evening, I drove to his officia trailer behind a hardware store with a guided hunts banner. When he opened the door, his smile died the second he saw my badge. Victor Wade's smile didn't just fade when he saw my badge. It collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. He stood in the doorway of his trailer office, the guided hunts banner flapping behind him, and I could almost see the gears grinding in his head, searching for an exit that didn't exist. I stepped forward, holding printouts of his website, his flyers, and a transcript of our recorded call. You lied to people, I said, keeping my voice steady but sharp. You sold access to land that's mine. Wade opened his mouth, then shut it when he saw the sheriff's star on my chest. I handed him a citation and laid out the evidence. His maps, his permits, his own words boasting about no ranger presence. I leaned in close. I should be cuffing you right now, but I want the whole story. Tell me who gave you those boundaries, how many people you've sent onto my property, and how much money you've made. Or next time, I'm bringing a warrant. He cracked faster than a dry twig under a boot. Wade admitted Harold Vance had pitched the idea at an HOA fundraiser, saying there was cash to be made off the wilderness overlay. Vance had signed off on the permits in private, calling them soft approved for promotional use. Wade even showed me emails where Vance promised the land was clear for hunting, no questions asked. I left with a stack of documents and a clear trail leading straight to the HOA's front door. Back home, I called my old friend Roger, a retired land lawyer who'd seen every dirty trick in the book. We met that afternoon in my barn office, the survey maps still spread across the table. Roger squinted at Wade's emails, adjusted his glasses, and shook his head. "They've walked into a property fraud case," he said. "This isn't just trespassing. If you prove multiple parties profited knowingly, it's racketeering." I nodded, feeling the weight of the fight shift. "Good. Let's set the bait." "Bait?" Roger raised an eyebrow. "Let them think they've won," I said. "Let them get comfortable. The next time one of their hunters crosses my line, it's not just trespassing, it's a sting." Roger grinned, the kind of grin that said he hadn't had this much fun since his last courtroom brawl. For the first time in weeks, I felt a calm settle over minute peace, but the certainty of a trap well set. Rusty wagged his tail under the table, like he could sense the tide turning. The next morning, I parked at the feed store, same as every Thursday, but I wasn't there for grain or wire. I was there to be seen. Word of the trespassing citations had spread through Benton County like wildfire, and I wanted the rumors to grow. I shook hands, nodded at neighbors, and shrugged when they asked about the ridge. "The law's the law," I said, letting the grapevine do the rest. By the time I left, I'd heard Harold Vance was fuming and Wade hadn't shown his face all day. Perfect. Let them sweat. Back at the ranch, I upgraded my defenses. I swapped out old trail cams for ones that streamed to a secure hard drive in the barn, complete with motion alerts to my phone. I added dummy cameras in plain sight, big, obvious decoys to make trespassers think they were being watched. The real ones were hidden in birdhouses, fence posts, and a low tree branch overlooking the only clear shot for a buck. Rusty trailed me through every step, his ears twitching at every snap of a twig. That night, I barely slept. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. 3 trucks due red. One white rolled past the lower access path, right through a broken side fence. The camera caught 4 men with rifles and gear bags. One moved like Wade, cocky and familiar. I didn't jump. I suited up, clipped on my badge, and grabbed my body cam. No sirens, no lights. This was going to be clean, quiet, and airtight. I radioed Deputies Miller and Hayes, who were on standby 2 ridges over, and sent them the coordinates. We'd move in once the group passed the North Trail marker. I parked at the trailhead and went in on foot, sticking to the shadows of the cedars. Their flashlights bobbed in the dark, slow and careless. They didn't expect trouble. That's what made them mine. They'd set up under the bluff by the creek, rifles on bipods, scopes scanning the glade. It was a textbook hunting spot if it wasn't my land. I signaled Miller and Hayes, who flanked wide and silent, circling from the high ground. I stepped out from the tree line. "Morning, boys," I said. They spun, but no one raised a weapon. Maybe they recognized me from Wade's last run-in, or maybe the badge glinted just right in their flashlight beams. Miller stepped up behind one, Hayes to the right. "You're trespassing on private property," I said. "Again. With firearms. Again. Hand over your licenses, permits, and anything claiming you're allowed here." Wade opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Don't say HOA. That excuse is dead." One guy tried to argue, but I wasn't listening. I had their plates on camera, video of them ignoring the no trespassing signs, and audio of them joking about scoring early before the sheriff shows. Now they were caught, rifles aimed at a deer path. This wasn't just trespassing, it was armed trespass with intent to poach. I read them their rights while Miller bagged their weapons, and Hayes photographed the scene. Rusty watched from the tree line, tail still, like he knew the job wasn't done. At the station, Wade broke down completely. He admitted Vance had promised him immunity, not in writing, but enough to make him bold. He named 3 other HOA board members who'd backed the deal, including one who'd hunted the ridge with a bow the previous weekend. That was the threat I needed. I sent everything to Roger, who filed an emergency motion to freeze all HOA projects tied to the disputed land. He also requested a restraining order to halt their land use decisions pending investigation. The judge signed both within 48 hours. Then the press got wind. Channel 5 out of Clarksville ran a story. Sheriff's land targeted by HOA hunters. I didn't say much, just showed them the bullet holes in my fence, the flattened grass where bait had been laid, and drone footage of how close the hunters had come to my livestock barn. The anchor asked about motive. I smiled. Some folks think a piece of paper lets them redraw boundaries. Out here, land means something. If you try to steal it, you'd better be ready for what's coming. The story aired that night. By morning, my phone was buzzing with messages from ranchers across the county, offering support in their tales of HOA overreach. One said he'd been pitched hunting rights near his pond, same fake, wildlife overlay. The pressure was building, and Vance tried to spin it, sending an email blast claiming the HOA was misinformed and blaming individual actors. Too late. The board was under review, their funds frozen, every permit flagged. But the HOA wasn't done fighting dirty. Just before dawn a week later, Rusty woke me, growling at the back door. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, boots half on. The northern fence was trashed wire cut, posts toppled, gate ripped off its hinges. A trail of blood led into the scrub. Not human. Hoof prints, wide and desperate, marked the path. I followed, Rusty at my side, until I found her. Daisy, my prize ewe, gutshot and dead in the trampled grass. A high-caliber wound, no predator. Left to rot. Not taken, just wasted. I crouched beside her, brushing dirt from her wool, my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Then I saw the metal Stakia camera pole, mount intact, but the camera gone. They'd known it was there. This wasn't hunting. This was a message, the kind cowards send when they're cornered. They wanted me to feel helpless, like no badge could stop them. They'd made a mistake. They left tire tracks. Shallow at first, but in a patch of mud from the previous night's rain, I found a crisp print. I photographed it, measured it, and cross-checked it with my plate data. It matched a black Tacoma I'd seen near the HOA clubhouse last week, owned by Carl Reed, the HOA treasurer and a known bow hunter. I didn't wait. I drove to his house, parked across the street, and watched the kitchen lights flick on. When Reed opened the door in his robe, I handed him the photo of the tire tread and hoof trail. Tell me why my ewe's dead, Carl. He swallowed, glanced over his shoulder, and stepped outside, closing the door. I didn't shoot anything, he said, too quickly. Then who did? I stepped closer. Tell me who was with you, what they drove, and where my camera is. Or this stops being a friendly chat. Reed folded like a cheap lawn chair. It was Vance's nephew, Ethan, and two buddies, out to send a message because the board was panicking over the injunction. Daisy was just collateral. The camera was stashed in a shed behind the clubhouse. I called Hayes for a warrant, then Roger, who was already drafting a legal sledgehammer. By mid-morning, we had a search team at the HOA office. The HOA clubhouse looked like a ghost town when we rolled up, the Preserving Our Community sign now a mocking relic of their arrogance. Harold Vance was there, standing in the parking lot, trying to play the part of an innocent bureaucrat caught in a misunderstanding. I brushed past him without a glance, my deputies trailing behind, warrant in hand. The shed behind the clubhouse was a cluttered mess, stacked chairs, tubs of paper plates, and, tucked in the corner, my stolen trail camera, still intact, memory chip untouched. I didn't say a word to Vance. I didn't need to. His face, pale and twitching, said he knew the game was up. Back at the station, I plugged in the camera and let the footage roll. It was a gold mine. Night vision capturing the fence being cut, Daisy's panicked run, the high-caliber shot that dropped her, and the camera being ripped from its mount. Best of all, it caught the faces of all three men: Ethan Vance, Harold's nephew, and two of his buddies clear as day. One even grinned at the lens, cocky enough to think he'd gotten away clean. We printed every frame. By noon, the footage was in Roger's hands, and he was prepping a legal arsenal that would make a prosecutor blush. The judge saw the evidence that afternoon and signed arrest warrants faster than I'd ever seen. By evening, deputies were knocking on doors. Ethan and his crew didn't even try to run, they just sat there, stunned, as the cuffs clicked shut. The neighborhood watched from their porches and garden fences, their HOA dreams crumbling in real time. This wasn't just about trespassing anymore. This was property fraud, wildlife violations, and destruction of livestock crimes that hit hard in a county where land and legacy mean everything. The arrests sent shockwaves. The HOA's group chat lit up with panic. Residents posting photos of my private property signs, asking if they'd be liable for stepping on their lawns, wondering if the sheriff was coming for them next. They weren't afraid of what they knew, they were terrified of what they didn't. They had no idea how much I'd seen, how far I'd go. Channel 5 was back, this time with a headline that cut like a knife. HOA hunters exposed. They played the night vision clip right after footage of Daisy's body being hauled from the brush. It wasn't gory, but it was raw enough to turn the community's unease into outright revolt. My inbox flooded with emails from residents desperate to distance themselves from the board. Some sent anonymous tips, others just apologized. One woman forwarded a screenshot of a deleted post from Vance's private group, where he'd bragged months earlier about claiming the Cedar Ridge before the sheriff notices. Roger added it to the evidence pile, a cherry on a case already bursting at the seams. The county court moved fast. A formal injunction shut down all HOA land management operations, and a special hearing was set to review criminal misconduct tied to trespassing, forged zoning filings, and wildlife violations. Roger and I sat in the courtroom that morning as the judge read the charges. Vance, drowning in a suit too big for his shrinking ego, sat beside his lawyer, trying to look composed. It was a weak act. The evidence was a tidal wave: forged maps, video footage, text messages, hunting permits with Vance's signature, and the HOA logo stamped on stolen boundaries. Vance's lawyer tried to argue the boundaries were unclear due to decades-old surveying errors. I nearly laughed when Roger slid my grandfather's 1959 survey map across the table, notarized, signed, and detailing every inch of the ridge in razor-sharp clarity. The judge didn't even blink. Vance wasn't arrested that day, that would come later, but his reputation died in that room. The judge ordered a rollback of the fraudulent overlays and handed the sheriff's department custody of all HOA zoning records for forensic review. The board was suspended, a receiver appointed to manage their funds, now mostly earmarked for legal fees. By afternoon, the clubhouse was padlocked, the guided hunts banner torn down, and every hunting permit voided. I drove back to the ridge that evening, not to gloat, but to walk it. Just me and Rusty. The land is quiet again, the kind of quiet you earn through blood and grit. The broken fence was patched, and the cameras were reinstalled with better mounts and encryption. A new sign stood at the main gate: "This land is under direct jurisdiction of the county sheriff. Trespassers will be prosecuted by the man who owns it." Rusty trotted ahead, tail loose for the first time in weeks. We stopped at the clearing where Daisy had fallen. I rested a hand on the post where the camera once stood. No more boot prints, no more shell casings, just silence and the weight of something restored, something deeper than property lines. It wasn't just about the land. It was about what it meant: memory, family, the kind of legacy you don't inherit with a vote or a signature. That night, I hosted a barbecue at the ranch, not a victory party, but a reckoning. I invited the judge, the county clerk, Pete the game warden, and a few neighbors who'd stood by me when it looked like I was tilting at windmills. We ate brisket by the fire pit, talked about the weather, crops, and old stories from before the subdivisions crept in. One of the younger ranchers, new to the county, asked how I knew the HOA would fold. I didn't, I said, poking the fire. I just knew what was mine. The stars hung heavy over the ridge, and as the fire died down, I looked out at the land that had nearly been stolen with paper and lies. It wasn't just dirt and grass. It was my grandfather's sweat, my father's calluses, my years of dawn patrols with Rusty at my side. Vance never understood that. Neither did Wade. You don't steal land from a sheriff not because of the badge, but because he knows every inch of it better than you ever will. But the fight wasn't over. The arrests and injunctions were a blow, but men like Vance don't go quietly. I knew they'd try one last desperate play. 2 nights later, it came. Rusty woke me at 4 a.m., growling low, hackles up. I grabbed my flashlight and sidearm, stepping out into the pre-dawn chill. At first, nothing, just the gray light of a sunrise waiting to break. Then I saw the southern fence. Wire slashed, posts kicked over, and a fresh trail of tire tracks leading into the scrub. This time, there was no blood, No dead livestock, just a spray-painted message on the gate. Back OFF. The paint was still wet, the tracks fresh in the dew-soaked dirt. I followed them to a clearing where a single trail cam had been smashed, its pieces scattered like a warning. They weren't hunting, now they were striking back, trying to scare me into submission. I photographed the tracks, measured the tread, and ran them against my database. They matched a silver Jeep registered to Greg Holt, a local contractor who'd been cozy with Vance at every HOA meeting. I didn't call for backup. Not yet. I drove to Holt's house, parked down the street, and waited until his garage light flicked on. When he stepped out, coffee in hand, I was already at his door. "Morning, Greg," I said, holding up a photo of the tire tread and the spray-painted gate. "Care to explain?" He froze, coffee sloshing over his hand. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let's talk about your Jeep," I said. "The one that left tracks on my land last night. Or the camera you smashed. Or the paint, I'm betting, is still in your garage." Holt's face crumpled. He didn't even try to lie. "It wasn't my idea," he blurted. "Vance said we had to push back, show you we weren't done. He's got half the board scared you're coming for their houses next." "Where's Vance now?" I asked. Holt hesitated, then spilled. Vance was holed up at his lake house, planning to wait out the storm while his lawyer spun a defense. I thanked Holt, told him to stay put, and called Roger. By noon, we had a warrant for Vance's arrest, property damage, conspiracy, and fraud. Deputies picked him up that evening, dragging him out of his lake house in front of his stunned neighbors. The man who'd thought he could redraw my land with a pen looked small in cuffs. His tin faded under the cruiser's lights. The arrest of Harold Vance wasn't just a headline, it was a seismic shift in Benton County. The man who'd strutted through HOA meetings like a king was now a grainy mugshot on Channel 5. His lake house retreat swapped for a holding cell. By morning, the HOA's collapse was the talk of every diner, feed store, and church parking lot. Neighbors who'd once nodded along to Vance's promises of community progress now whispered about his lies, their trust shattered. For me, Sheriff Tom Harlan, it wasn't about gloating. It was about finishing what I'd started, making sure no one ever mistook my land for a playground again. The courtroom was packed the day Vance's case came up. Roger and I sat in the front row, my grandfather's 1959 survey map folded in my pocket like a talisman. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who'd grown up on a farm herself, didn't waste time. The evidence was a mountain. Forged overlays, night vision footage of Ethan Vance and his crew killing Daisy, text messages bragging about claiming the ridge, and Victor Wade's testimony tying it all to Harold Vance. Wade had flipped fully, trading a lighter sentence for every email, receipt, and handshake deal he'd made with the HOA board. Vance's lawyer tried one last desperate play, claiming the HOA had acted in good faith based on outdated county records. Roger didn't even stand to counter, just slid a notarized copy of my family's deed across the table, its ink as clear as the day it was signed. The judge raised an eyebrow, and the room stifled a laugh. Vance slumped in his chair, the fight drained out of him. The ruling came down like a gavel. Guilty on charges of property fraud, conspiracy, and wildlife violations. Sentencing would follow, but the judge made it clear Vance was looking at years, not months. His nephew, Ethan, and the other two faced lesser charges, but were already cooling their heels in county lockup. The HOA itself was gutted. The court dissolved the board, froze their accounts, and appointed a state receiver to oversee what was left, mostly debts and legal fees. Every hunting permit they'd issued was voided, their wilderness overlay erased from county records. The clubhouse stayed padlocked, its manicured lawn growing shaggy, a symbol of their overreach. Residents, now free from Vance's grip, started talking about forming a new association, one that didn't treat private land like a communal sandbox. I didn't stop at the courtroom. Back at the ranch, I doubled down on security. New cameras, now with cloud backups and tamper-proof mounts, watch every trail. I rebuilt the southern fence stronger than before, with steel posts sunk deep in concrete. The sign at the main gate, "This land is under direct jurisdiction of the county sheriff. Trespassers will be prosecuted by the man who owns it," became a local legend, photographed by ranchers who'd faced their battles with greedy developers. Rusty, my hound, seemed to sense the victory, running the fence line again with his old swagger, tail high. The community's response was something I hadn't expected. Ranchers from across the county drove out to shake my hand, bringing stories of their fights against HOAs and zoning boards trying to nibble at their land. One old-timer, who'd sold his farm to a subdivision years back, said he wished he'd fought like I did. "You didn't just save your ridge," he told me. "You reminded us what it means to stand for something." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and offered him a beer. The press wouldn't let it go, either. Channel 5 ran a follow-up, Sheriff's Stand, how one man stopped an HOA land grab, complete with drone shots of my ranch and interviews with neighbors who'd turned on Vance. They asked me what drove me to push so hard. I thought of Daisy, my ewe, lying dead in the scrub, and the bullet holes in my fence posts. "Some things aren't negotiable," I said. "Land's one of them. Family's another. You mess with either, you're messing with me." That evening, I stood on my porch with Rusty at my side, watching the sun sink behind the cedar ridge. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that promises fall. I thought about my grandfather, who'd bought this land with cash he'd saved working the railroad, and my father, who'd taught me to walk the fence line before I could ride a bike. They'd bled for this place, same as I had. Vance and his cronies thought they could erase that with a few forged maps and a stack of permits. They didn't just underestimate meth, they underestimated what this land means. The final piece fell into place a week later. Roger called to say the county had launched a broader investigation into HOA practices statewide, spurred by my case. Other sheriffs were digging into similar land grabs, and the state legislature was talking about new laws to protect private property from zoning scams. My ridge had become a spark, igniting a reckoning bigger than I'd imagined. I didn't set out to be a hero, but I wasn't sorry either. I hosted one last gathering at the ranch, not for the press or the court, but for the people who'd stood by me. Pete the game warden brought his wife, the county clerk brought pie, and the judge showed up in jeans, looking like she'd been waiting for a night like this. We sat around the fire pit, eating ribs and swapping stories under a sky so clear the stars felt close enough to touch. Rusty sprawled by my feet, snoring softly, content in a way only a dog can be. One of the neighbors, a woman who'd sent me that screenshot of Vance's deleted post, asked if I'd do it all again, knowing how ugly it got. I looked out at the ridge, its silhouette sharp against the night. "Every damn day," I said. "This isn't just land. It's who we are." The fire crackled, and the conversation turned to lighter things: football, harvests, the new diner opening in town. But I carried that question with me, turning it over like a smooth stone. It wasn't about the land alone. It was about justice, about standing up when someone tries to take what's yours not with a fist, but with proof, patience, and the law. Vance learned that the hard way. So did Wade, Ethan, and every hunter who thought my ridge was up for grabs. Months later, I still walked the fence line at dawn, Rusty at my heel, checking posts and cameras. The ridge is quiet now, the way it's supposed to be. No more gunshots, no more spray paint. Just the wind in the cedars and the lowing of my herd in the distance. I passed the spot where Daisy fell, now marked with a small stone I set myself. It's not a grave, it's a reminder. This land is mine, paid for in sweat, blood, and stubbornness. Anyone who tries to take it will find me waiting, badge or no badge. The HOA is gone, its leaders scattered or shamed. Vance is serving 3 years. His lake house was sold to cover fines. Ethan and his crew got probation, community service, and a lifetime ban from hunting. The county records are clean, my deed untouchable. But what sticks with me isn't the victory, it's the cost. Daisy's death, the sleepless nights, the neighbors who looked the other way until it was too late. That's what makes justice bittersweet. It's not about winning. It's about what you're willing to lose to make things right. I'll keep walking this land, same as my father did, same as his father before him. And if another Vance comes along, thinking he can steal what's mine with a pen or a rifle, he'll find the same thing they all did. A sheriff who knows every inch of his ground, every shadow on his ridge, and every line in the dirt that no one crosses. Thank you for reading The Line in the Dirt. This story isn't just about a sheriff and his land, it's about standing up to injustice, fighting for what's yours, and facing down those who think power comes from a signature or a gun. But it also raises tough questions. How far is too far when protecting what's yours? Was the violence against Daisy a step too far by the HOA, or just a desperate act in a losing game? And what does justice mean when it costs so much to get it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your take on the role of violence and injustice in this story. Did Tom Harlan go too far, or was his fight exactly what was needed? Have you faced your battles with unfair systems or greedy neighbors? Take a stand, tell your story, and let's get the conversation going. Your voice matters. Let's keep this fire burning.